You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Daniel Davis, and we certainly have a wonderful show ahead for you today. Joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program is author of a wonderful book called Camp. That's right, where Fantasy Island meets Lord of the Flies. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program is our guest today to talk about the wonderful days of summer camp. Roger Bennett is joining us by phone, and he is the Vice President of Andrea and Charles Bronfman Philanthropies in New York City. And we're going to talk today about summer camp and the wonderful times that people may have experienced or maybe not had, but see if we can relive some of those wonderful memories anyway. Joining us today here is Roger Bennett. And Roger, thank you for joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
Thank you for having me on, Daniel.
You bet. Now, myself, I didn't have any direct experience with summer camp per se, but I did many of the kinds of camps that would last for about a week, maybe 4 days, and so forth. So I really got a taste for it. But talk to us about what summer camp is for those who may not be familiar with it.
Absolutely. I mean, the book is about Sleepaway Camp, which is a 4 or 8 week experience where kids would leave their towns and cities and their families behind and head off to rural settings in each of the states of America where they would come together on camp, which was like a utopia, a little culture run by kids for kids, where they would spend the summer playing sports, performing in theatre, expressing their creativity in arts and crafts activities, but really listening to incredible music, having freedom away from their families to be, in many cases, the kids they really wanted to be, and having just first after first after first. It was where you learned to shoot a jump shot or learned to swim the backstroke, where you first heard Jay Giles' band or Earth, Wind and Fire and they blew your mind, or first had your first kiss, or even more, and it was all going on in one place at one time, and everybody around you was experimenting in a similar way. But the book is about summer camp, and it's not about summer camp at all. We try to use the photographs of the 1980s and early 90s to tell the story of our generation, the clothes we wore, the music we listened to, the adolescent experience writ large. And so the book is kind of about camp, but it's really about who we are and how we got to be this way.
Exactly. Now, what was interesting about summer camp is for many kids, it would be the first time they would be away from home, away from mom and dad, so they would experience for the first time what it was like to actually be homesick, as much as they were looking forward to get away from mom and dad. Usually you get into it a bit, and somehow you get overwhelmed with the fact, I really feel like I miss mom and dad. And also it's another time for those of us who are growing into our teen years to experience, if you will, experiment lightly in some ways, sexuality, being able to come into our own and that feeling of romance. Now, I'm looking through this book here, and it's just really astounding how a lot of these photographs actually begin to take me away, especially because the time that I experienced, like, my version of summer camp, if you will, was actually with the Boys Club. I got an opportunity to spend a week away at Big Bear, which was in the San Bernardino Hills of California. And, you take a look at this. This was back in 1973 for me, but you take a look at this, and it takes you back no matter what era it was, because this book even goes into into the 1990s. So
absolutely, it ends when Clinton became president, which I think was the hallmark of a different era. But I love what you're saying. That we put up a website and asked people for their photographs and their stories, and we're blown away to get over 80,000 different images sent to us. And on one level you think, why would anybody want to look at photographs that are not mine or that I don't appear in? But when you build this, what I think is kind of a Smithsonian-size collection, you can build sets of photographs that people do emotionally connect to, even though you're not the boy holding up the football above their head in a T-shirt that's 5 sizes too big for you and covers your shorts, or the girl standing with a counselor on whom you had a paralyzing crush and wanted to be with for 8 weeks. Once you start to build these kind of collections, you do allow people to not just look at photographs, but our hope is to emotionally reconnect to a time and a place which is now long gone, and think about who we are and how we got to be that way. And so that's really the whole point. I think you can smell the Drakkar Noir aftershave You can hear the Jay Giles band playing freeze frame. You can see the boombox, which is just out of shot in almost every picture.
Mm-hmm. Now, what I also like, too, or what I found interesting most of all, is that in the book it seemed like most of the camps seemed to be like in the northeastern part of the United States and into Canada. And I kind of wondered, were there many summer camps, say, in the central or even into the West Coast? Or
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, you have hit the nail on the head. The New England area and just below is summer camp headquarters for the United States of America. But there's summer camps in almost every state. In a couple of weeks' time, 12 million kids, and an astronomical number are about to leave home to go to partake in the modern version of the summer camp experience. And the book is littered with West Coast camps and ones in Minnesota, Colorado, Illinois, Wisconsin, and the like. But the differences are what are fascinating. On the East Coast, camp is very traditional. Each camp is a compressed universe with its own rhythms and traditions. The camps on the West Coast, instead of having a lake that you swim in or really try not to swim in, were often based on the beach, and the whole atmosphere was very, very different. And I think you can see the regionality playing through beautifully in the book.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think what's interesting, too, because like you said, it's really about us or who we were. And summer camp is one of those times that you can in some ways say there was no holds barred, even though there was rules, of course, parameters. But you were really allowed to stretch yourself as far as kind of breaking those rules. You hear stories, of course, that I'm sure you shared in the book about things like panty raids or, the girls kind of going wild as well, and just the different silly little things that we were able to get to do. And, of course, when you get punished, there was usually plenty of second chances unless you were just too rowdy and they cast you out in general. But it was also a time that, as you were saying earlier, that people came together, and this was the only time they would see these people were at summer camp, so you really build these bonds. Now, let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think you're right about the raids. It was a remarkable part of camp life, and one of the people we interviewed said that just before our parents would visit on visiting day, the camp director would announce at night, "No raiding tonight, guys, no raiding." And he said it's then you'd realize that you thought you were breaking rules by raiding every other night, but you're only doing it because the camp knew you were doing it and they allowed it to happen. But the other point you're making is the absolutely right one, and it was mind-blowing, to be honest, Daniel, interviewing bunkmates of former campers and hearing them talk about how they've maintained their relationship in the deepest way. It became clear to us that the relationships that are formed in the bunks and in the pine cabins of American camp are for many so much more formative than those that they even had in high school or college. And I think that the root of that is that camp gave so many of us the opportunity to be the person that we really wanted to be. Your reputation had solidified at high school. You were what you were and you couldn't shake it. But once you arrived at camp, if you wanted to be a comedian or a great sportswoman or a ladies' man or a raconteur or an artsy individual, you had a chance for a do-over. And I think many of us would love that in this time and this place. But camp was that to so many people, the place that they really were, where they really began to be the person they wanted to be.
And it's interesting, too, because the counselors, it seems like they were chosen in a very specific way to say, well, I feel like you're being firm with me, but at the other hand, I know I'm going to kind of get a second chance. So you were really allowed sort of a way of pushing boundaries, as you said, a grow of self-discovery. Now, you featured in your book a wonderful foreword by Ivan Reitman, which many people, if they don't know, was the person who directed the wonderful film, one of my favorite films, especially of Bill Murray of all time, the movie Meatballs. Now, how did you get him involved with the book?
We've got so many people involved in this book. There's some incredible writers. A.J. Jacobs, who did The Year of Living Biblically, wrote a beautiful place about being a victim in high school but becoming a bully when he was in camp. Sloane Crossley wrote several beautiful pieces for the book. David Wayne, Paul Feig, who's a hero of mine, he did Freaks and Geeks. All of that. It was like offering people the chance to paint the Sistine Chapel, to go back to that time and place. Who wouldn't want that? But Ivan Reitman is a god. And Meatballs, as you say, is not just a classic movie, but for so many people it defined the experiences act that they had at camp. They were trying to act what they'd already seen in the movie and making it real, which is a very funny thing when you think about it. So he was the only logical choice to ask to write the introduction, and when he agreed and wrote what is such a beautiful tribute to the place that this uniquely American institution has in our life, I think the book at one level really is a testament to the wonder that is America. We are indebted and honored to Mr. Reitman that he took that step.
I know that it was a time after seeing the movie, which was back in the very early, I think it was about 1980 or 81,
yep.
that I had seen the movie for the first time. And it was actually one of those sub-movies to the main feature.
Really?
Yeah, well, at least when I seen it at the drive-in, which seems to be one of those other dying species I think people should actually talk about too, but going to the drive-in to see the main feature, and it seemed to be like one of those films that you got to see that after the main feature, and then the main feature would come back again. They had a habit of doing that in drive-in so you could stay all night. But in watching the movie and the zaniness of Bill Murray, and especially with Chris Makepeace, who was the lonely lost kid that they ordered, as he called him. There seemed to be a lot of those in those summer camps, but they came into their own. There was a way they could feel their way into belonging, if you will. But it made me actually want to be a camp counselor because he made the position, if you will, look like so much fun.
Well, I think counselors were gods, even though they were just often 1 or 2 years older than the kids they were meant to be looking after. They were gods, and they defined the rhythm and the mores of the camps. If they wore certain clothes or if they were styled their hair in a certain style, every girl or boy in the camp was destined to follow them. And Mr. Reitman wrote in his introduction, I honestly believe I wouldn't have the life or the career that I now have had I not gone to camp. That was where I first started my band, acted in a play, competed in group sports, and learned that one can actually talk to members of the opposite sex. He really captures what I think is the case for so many people who would leave their office careers and the lives they've made for themselves in a heartbeat to return to that time and a place where it felt like anything was possible.
Now let's talk about some of the things that we did at camp or that were done at camp here that especially you feature in the book. The one that I thought was really quite interesting here came from a Rachel Cohen of Camp Tel Yehuda, which was in Berryville, New York, and this was in 1985, where she submitted what was known as the purity test.
Yes. It's an amazing. We actually put that up on our website, and people are taking it today. So
Are they?
You can actually see it on the website, Camp Book. But it was very common. It was a list of 100, how would you describe them? 100 acts that you could partake in with a member of your own sex or the opposite sex in a semi-romantic fashion. And she wrote that it's an incredibly in-depth list that starts with kissing and ends in a much more sexually active fashion. And she said every night from the beginning of summer to the end, the girls would take the purity test. And at the beginning of the summer, they'd score a relatively puritanical 84. And by the end of the summer, most of them were down to kind of the mid-50s. And I think that really is a symbol of what was going on at camp. It was a vast sexual petri dish where everybody was experimenting. You were experimenting in a bunk of people who were all trying to do the same thing as you were. And there was healthy competition, but there was also an incredible amount of information sharing. And one woman said that at night after a party, we'd whisper in the darkness of the bunk, and it felt like church. The intimacy was so profound.
Mm-hmm. I know that as we were talking earlier in the program about camp, is that many of these kids who went to camp would actually form bonds that in many cases, as you stated, would be stronger than the ones that you would have in high school and college. And I think there's an interesting movie out there if people are interested that really touches on that. And I actually didn't know that Camp Tamaqua was really a true camp because, usually in movies it's a fictional place. Mm-hmm. But it was the movie Indian Summer. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And you get to see where these basically approaching midlife types come together to this camp. And the stars Alan Arkin, who's the camp counselor, who really loves the place. And he really points his finger at a poignant time that you can see it was a life that he just loved. He ran the camp, and he simply says, I was here doing this in the golden years, but he says, now I'm starting to basically lose touch with the kids. I just don't understand them anymore. And so you could see how you would kind of need fresh legs to kind of go in there and be the camp steward, if you will, or even the counselor, because that's just how it is. And I take a look at some of these pictures, like, for instance, as you were talking earlier about the boom boxes, for instance. When I was in camp, somebody probably had a little radio somewhere, but you were just out there in nature, so you really didn't have that, I guess, if you will, participation of the outside world. You were in a world all by yourself.
Yeah, well, whoever brought the boombox really defined the sound of the summer. And I think camp was an incredible place musically, because music just drove the place, but it had its own soundtrack. The new music, the Violent Femmes, the B-52s, REM, would coexist with the old folk classics like If I Had a Hammer, and of course the Who, Led Zepp, and the Dead were just always there, lying in wait to be discovered by kids who would lie out on the baseball diamond in the middle of the night listening to some Pink Floyd, shutting their eyes or looking up at the stars and imagining that this is what college would feel like. But the music really stood out, and we've just started on our third volume of our generational history. We intend to do about 20 of these books, and it's looking purely at music and how it defined our generation. It's a project called Tried to Rock, where we're telling the sonic history of our generation as told by the stories of bands that never made it. Mm-hmm. So if people in Portland, which I know is an incredibly musical city, were in bands in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that existed maybe even just for a week or a month or a year, and they started with incredible aspirations and big dreams and ended with a bang or a whimper. We're collecting stories, photographs, and MP3s via the website now, and we'd love everybody who's listening to the show to be a participant.
Very good. Now, I know that as I'm looking through these pictures here, I kind of wonder to myself, again, as you're looking through this book titled Camp, Where Fantasy Island Meets Lord of the Flies, it really, if you've had this experience, you start sort of stewing in your own experience, just remembering some of these remarkable times, and you start to realize that even though, and for instance, as most of the camps that are featured in this book are from the northeastern part of the United States, that they all seem the same. It's like, hey, I remember a kid who looked just like that, or a girl who was just like that, or someone that I had a crush on, and it's just interesting how similar everybody seems.
I love what you're saying, and I really hope that's the case, that while at the beginning of the project people kept saying, why would I want to look at photographs that I wasn't in? I do think when you get to a scale of this size and this complex and this beautiful and rich, that you cannot help but drift back to that time and that place when you were wearing the Esprit, you were wearing white Keds, leather or canvas, you were putting on stonewashed jeans, you were wearing a Cosby sweater with pride, and like it seemed like the whole of life was ahead of you, everything was possible, and the night ahead was going to be one which would either end in a fumbling chance to try and get to second base or abject misery back in the bunk.
Now, I got a kick out of the one scene here, and it certainly brings me back to the 80s, and that is this, there was a Michael Jackson lookalike that apparently was at Camp Kenwood. And
yes, he even brought his own bodyguard who was that thorough in his job. The other thing that I love about that is that there's a Herschel Walker, the sports star, also in the summer when he wasn't playing sport, would go to summer camps and earn extra money by turning up, doing a celebrity presentation, and then he'd be patiently throw the football to every kid in the camp. It could take between 5 and 8 hours. And that kind of a thing, you realize just how innocent and naive it was in the 80s. Today, a sports star, they're paid so much money and they live such a high life that the gap between sports stars and their fans is unfathomable. Back even in the 1980s, sports stars thought nothing of dropping in, earning an extra buck by tossing a football to young kids at a summer camp, and I find that kind of mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm. Now, I noticed, too, that some of the summer camps actually had computers, and, when you take a look at the picture that they have of these computers, these are literally when the PC was starting to get in hand, and I'm thinking, geez, here it was 1973, and you were lucky if you had a transistor radio, and you certainly didn't have any TV anywhere, but these guys had computers. That's interesting.
Yeah, the word Commodore was on everybody's lips as the cutting edge of technology, and it's gorgeous to see. You see these guys posing proudly in front of the Commodore PET, as if now they were holding up the latest in iPhone technology. I mean, it was an honor to be able to press the buttons and play the very, very rigid and dull games. The same to be the camp DJ. There's some gorgeous photographs of young kids who were semi-legendary in their own camps. They'd spin the discs that would play the music that the camp would rock to. And all of all of this stuff just shows how, even in just 2 decades, life has become so much more complicated. Technology has advanced at such an incredible pace, and the book is a return to, I think, a more naive and innocent place, and offer people the opportunity to ask themselves how we got here from there.
Well, it's certainly a wonderful compilation for those just tuning in. We're talking with Roger Bennett, put together a book called Camp, Where Fantasy Island Meets Lord of the Flies. And if you've ever had that experience of summer camp, perhaps you could even contribute your own story on their website, which I'd love for you to give them right now.
It's campbook.com, and the book itself is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Borders, and all good bookstores across the country.
Very good. Now, one of the points that I wanted to make up that I think is really a nice key thing for people to understand who may not have experienced summer camp, and sad to say, you really missed out on something if you didn't at least get that experience to at least be a few days a week, or in maybe the case of summer camp, at least a month away from home, to basically be a different you. But what camp also offered were what I would call true, or at least the last bastion of opportunities as a rite of passage for growing.
Absolutely. I think that's beautifully well said.
And that's, well, I say that because looking in the book here, you're looking at some of them where you see people dressed in Indian garb and literally performing ceremonies. And you could see there's that rite of passage. And just recently I was doing a program on that, and realizing you just don't see that too much anymore. The rite of passage this day and age is you move on to high school, or it's your first date, or it's the first time that you start driving, or it's the first time that you start drinking. In fact, there was some of that going on in here with, I believe it was Pabst Blue Ribbon. But the point is that there were those opportunities, those rites of passage that seemed sacred, so it was like you were taking away something that was all yours that you got to hold.
Well, we learned that every single camp, and there's thousands of them in every state across the country, have their own particular ritual, their own rhythm, their own traditions. And as one person beautifully wrote, camp was repetitive. It ran to its own cycle. You knew everything after the first year. But in fact, the only thing that changed year to year was you. And I think the book is a tribute to the power of ritual in the everyday, and the power of growth, and also makes a great case for summer camp to be among the more definitive experiences of our generation. It has literally shaped the lives of thousands and thousands of kids across the country, and this book tries to trace back the footsteps of that experience.
I just, like I said, I think it's just so wonderful because you take a look at this and you realize, well, you know, I was just so glad to have that experience, because this, for many kids, was the first place they would actually learn how to swim. It would be a person who would actually, for the first time, maybe shoot a .22 rifle. Maybe a place that somebody would, for the first time, pull a bow and arrow. And most definitely, it was a place where you stayed up way past your curfew, sneaking around and getting into things that you normally shouldn't be doing. So you get to see the opportunity to really grow and develop in a well-rounded way through the experience.
It was also a complicated place. Everything you've said is absolutely right, but I think the real joy of camp is that it was emotionally complicated. You were blown away by the freedom and opportunity you had, as you've identified, but you're also tremendously homesick. You were excited to be in this amazing peer group who are all experiencing firsts in the bunk night after night, but there was also a rigid social hierarchy that could occasionally lead to kind of hazing and individuals being cast out from the group. And it was the kind of place where you could feel that you were so deeply in love that your heart was fuller than it could ever possibly be again, and get dumped, and then be back in love with someone else all in the same night. And I think it's that complexity that made camp such a joyous place for so many people.
I just have to ask you, Roger, what was the reason or your inspiration for producing this book here? I mean, was there an experience that you had with summer camp and you thought, you know, this is just something that I find real necessary?
Absolutely. I grew up in Liverpool, England, as I'm sure you can hear by my accent. And English counsellors are part of the fabric of camp life. We come across to teach soccer or work in the kitchen. I came over because I'd been fed a steady diet of Heart to Heart, Starsky and Hutch, The Love Boat, and Fantasy Island, and wanted to see this amazing America up at first hand and close, and ended up being sent off to the backwoods of Maine to this unbelievable place. It really was like a compressed universe. As we say, Fantasy Island meets Lord of the Flies, a world run by kids for kids. And I was just blown away by this uniquely American experience that really is a testament, I think, to the wonders of America. And realized when I wanted to try and tell the history, the cultural history, the musical history, the social history, that summer camp was the obvious place to do it.
I think it's just really wonderful, again, for people who want to at least relive the experience. Camp is the name of the book. It's where Fantasy Island meets Lord of the Flies, and our guest joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program is our guest, Roger Bennett. Now, what were you hoping, or I guess the best way to put this is, how did you get the message out there to get such participation for what you have in this book?
The answer to that lies in the internet, and a real testament to that. We started a website. We did a book called Bar Mitzvah Disco that used bar mitzvahs of the 1980s to begin to tell the story, adolescent story of our generation. And camp just seemed like the logical next step. A bar or bat mitzvah, the individual is often humiliated in front of his friends or her family and their entire community. Camp, you are ripped away from the family and given this freedom and this opportunity. And it really is the place where you truly become a man or a woman. And so we set up our website, invited people to send in their memories, their photographs, their stories, and we're blown away by the response. As I've said, there's an army of people across this country who are living what seem on the surface to be relatively normal lives, but would leave them in a heartbeat for just one more summer back in this time and that place.
Now, are there summer camps out there for, I guess, the older kids, if you will?
That is a remarkable idea, Daniel. And I think if there are
I was just thinking, because when I was
they could do a lot worse than to open throwback camps and give people the experience one more time.
Well, because I was considering, again, the movie, which was Indian Summer, in which these people went back to the camp, and the specific reason was so that the person that owned it could bequeath it, give it to somebody who would like to have it continue. And some of them were like, oh, this is silly. Do we have to do the swim test? We'd rather just be taking a nap or doing something else. But then you realize, as it creeps into them, they realize just how much of that they were truly missing. And I just thought it would be really interesting if there were something like that out there for the aging kids, if you will, because you could just see what kind of crazy things we might do as adults.
All I can tell you is we did over 300 interviews of former bunkmates who are still deeply in touch, and their fanaticism, their willingness to drudge through the micro detail of their camp experiences, the level to which they attest that camp made them who they are today, and prove that like different bunks that we met at bunk, all of whom became comedy writers in Los Angeles together. We met a bunk. These bunks were arbitrarily thrown together. A bunk that all entered the fashion industry together. A bunk that all became writers together. Where you were and how you lived, it defined your life, arguably far more, as I've said, than high school and college. And all I can attest to is the size of the market. And if there are any budding entrepreneurs listening to this, I'd suggest that it is an idea that really bears further thinking. The only undoing may be that I don't know if anything's as fun the second time, but I'm sure we'll find out.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of tough thinking, I'm going into this experience with an old memory, and I hope it's something that'll be enjoyable, such as the one particular character that was in the movie Indian Summer. He goes, everything seems so small. I don't remember it being this small. And that's just it, because it was a whole big world when you were a kid. It was just amazing.
When you were a kid, the counselors, who were normally just 1 year, 2 years older than you, they seemed kind of like real gods, fully formed men and women who you idolized and aspired to be. I think everything felt very different back then.
Mhm. And of course, what camp wouldn't be complete without the ostentatious food fight? And those did exist. I did remember that happening once or twice. Where, oh boy, it's just, and where else could you get into a food fight without having to visit a principal? You know, it's like, okay, clean this mess up, would you?
The whole rhythm and tradition of the camp dining experience is the particular foods that only seem to exist in camp. The gossip. Somebody said the dinners and the lunches were where the camp gossip would spread faster than a good Klingon joke at a Star Trek convention. There's a whole chapter to this, and of course the food fight is the denouement. And in the book, a number of individuals share their strategies and their tactics that they finally honed over years of flinging food around camp records about how to really dominate the camp food fight.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you again, for the folks out there, it's a wonderful book, especially if you've had the experience of going to summer camp or even to a level where you were away from home for a good few days to a week, where you were away from your family and the known neighborhood that you lived in to a place that was completely foreign. It was completely different than you were used to, but it was also a place that you can really get to know who you were. And I just, again, when I got this book, I was just really elated because I remember the experience and wished it for anybody who had ever not had the experience that you really should have. And again, the book is called Camp. And Roger Bennett, we want to thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today. Wonderful book. Go ahead and give that website again.
The camp website is campcampbook.com, and it's available on Amazon and bookstores across the country. Daniel, thank you so much for having us on.
You bet. And just one quick question. Do you have any upcoming projects that might be kind of related to this? Or?
Yeah, I mean, the one that we're really focusing on right now is the sequel, which is, as I said, about music. It's Try to Rock. If you Google Try to Rock, you will find the website, and we're trying to do a sonic history of American music as told by bands of the 70s, 80s, and 90s who never made it. So that band you were in the church hall or in your basement with your best friends, it may have lasted a week or a month or a year. You started with big dreams and you ended with a heated argument. We'd love to get your stories, your photographs, and your MP3s, and maybe get the band back together again.
Sounds good. Again, Roger Bennett, thank you for joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you, Daniel.
You bet. Again, the book is Camp, where Fantasy Island meets Lord of the Flies, and you can find that on our website. We'll certainly have that available for you. Just simply visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is 50 with the number 50, and sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter, where you'll also find a lot of the archives of our past shows, including this one. I want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us today, and also Roger Bennett for participating with us on the program today. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us, and remember, live your day past halfway.